I don't even think most people know what it is that they're saying. It's just put out there. Everybody jumps on this trend without fully knowing why.
I feel like there is a misconception that talking about suicide with somebody who is struggling with suicidal thoughts makes it worse.
Did she watch 13 Reasons Why? I don't know, potentially. But also, even if the kids didn't necessarily watch the show, it doesn't mean it doesn't influence how other people around them are talking about suicide or talking about bullying.
We kind of talk about this all the time, right? It's not your fault this is happening to you. You don't deserve to be bullied, but it's your responsibility to take care of your mental health.
What's up, guys? John here with Blueprint Mental Health, welcoming you to the 5th episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today, I have our friend Carly back once again, along with Taylor and Sam. Today's topic of discussion is going to be pop culture and mental health, and how mental health is portrayed in pop culture. So I want to talk a little bit of like why we picked this topic, right? I guess, you know what, it's something that pops up a lot. You know, mental health is definitely being portrayed a lot more now in media and in pop culture. But I want to talk a little bit about why it's important for us to talk about that. Pop culture is different than it used to be, at least when I was growing up, right? Like growing up for me, I had, you know, basically it was like the TV, right? That I would watch in the morning while having my breakfast before going to school. And then that was it until I came home and watched TV again, or maybe jumped on my Nintendo and played a little Zelda or something like that. Today's times, you know, we have access to pop culture all day long. So how mental health is depicted within that media and within pop culture, I think is more impactful than it used to be. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I think the access is like the main thing, right? We have pop culture things at our fingertips. And so naturally the media that we consume, even if we're only on our phones a little bit, watching media a little bit a day, the media we consume is going to matter with our overall perspective, the way we think, the way we see representation, stereotypes, different things like that, for sure.
That's so funny because I said that to you guys yesterday. We were talking about Mean Girls.
Yes.
And if you remember, like, Bring It On and how...
You're talking about the movie Mean Girls.
The movie Mean Girls.
I've seen it.
And how, like, when we were teenagers, the mean girl was really glamorized and romanticized. And so admittedly, me in middle school, like, I was like, oh, that's the cool thing to do. And I picked up on those behaviors. And looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, that was so mean.
Yeah.
So you're a mean girl.
I was a little bit of a mean girl. I grew out of it quickly, but there was definitely a time where I was like, oh, this is the cool way to be.
Yeah.
But like middle school mean girl?
Middle school mean girl.
Because middle school mean, I actually refer to that as middle school mean. Like there's a level of meanness
There's
that takes
nothing
place.
worse.
Yeah, man.
Like middle school's like eat or be eaten.
Yeah.
100%.
But it's not. We just think it is. And
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I think it's like hormones are kicking in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone's jockeying for their position in the social hierarchy. And so they could like, middle schoolers can like go for the fucking jugular, you know? Like they really do.
Well, I think that's why it matters, right? Like we see a lot of like younger clients, little all the way up to teenagers and young adults, and those are your formative years. And so the media that they consume are, like you said, going to shape how they look at the world, at least a little bit.
I also think that now that we have streaming platforms like Netflix and Hulu and all of these other things, we have access to watch all of these series and all of these shows over and over again at any point in time in any place. So I think that's another big factor to pop culture now, is our access.
I've decided that when McKenna's old enough to watch these shows, if there's a mean girl in it, I'm going to talk to her after and be like, okay, what part of that movie or show wasn't appropriate?
Right.
Which way shouldn't we act?
Right.
She's going to slam her door in your face.
But you know what though? Like I think,
consequences.
and not to get off topic too much here, but like I do believe that the younger parents now are going to take a much different approach to their kids and the consumption of media and access to phones. And like 10 years ago when I was working at a higher level of care, those kids coming through were kind of like the guinea pigs, when it was like these were the first group of kids that had like nonstop access to their phones and like all the social media and everything, and parents didn't really know what to do. We didn't know what the outcomes were going to be from the use. Where now I think it is going to be more like you're saying, of like taking that approach of like, yeah, you can watch it, but we're going to kind of process that a little bit when we're done.
We're going to talk
and
about
understand it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Kids have more access to this content. Adults have more access also. A lot of kids are spending less time outside of the house, right? And having less real world interactions with each other. So their view of reality is based upon then the media that they're consuming. And that has an unbelievable ability then to shape what their future perspective on reality is going to be moving forward. So for us as clinicians, it's super important as to how we're thinking about mental health being depicted in pop culture and in the media, good and bad. For, I guess, the sake of the conversation, let's start with the bad stuff, right? I feel like that's probably more fun to kind of talk about than the good stuff, which is unfortunate, but it's true. And unfortunately, I think that there might be, and this might be my own skewed perception, that I think there is more negative stuff out there when it comes to mental health in the media and pop culture than positive. Or maybe it's just getting talked about more because it's negative. I'm not 100% sure. But what are you guys seeing? Negative stuff that's out
I think
there?
it's a little bit of both, because like we were saying, the media is so saturated with content now, like there just probably is more content that's negative depictions and positive depictions. But when I think of negative representation of mental health in the media, I think inaccurate representation, right? Or like usually what's portrayed in TV, movies, social media, whatever, they're portraying mental health in like extremes because that's what gets viewers' attention, that's what's entertaining, but it may not be an accurate representation of what that diagnosis actually looks like. On one hand, it could be entertaining, but on the other, it's maybe spreading misinformation in a way, which, yeah, that can matter a lot, because if you are struggling with your mental health and you see somebody struggling with something similar on TV or a movie, and then that's portrayed in a way that puts them in a bad light or is judgmental or just isn't really accurate to your experience, it can really create a lot of shame. It can create a lot of confusion, maybe even like stops people from wanting to ask for help. There's like stigma around a lot of different diagnoses. So that like snowball effect can really matter. That's what I've seen, at least.
When you just said stigma, what came to mind for me was the Amityville horror movie and schizophrenia, and how that was just, everyone watched that movie and thought, oh my God, schizophrenics are violent and they're dangerous, and that's just absolutely so inaccurate.
Yeah.
Right. It's possible, right? It happens, but not in relation to how often and how much we're seeing it in media. Going back to kind of Carly's point of like, that's what gets the clicks, that's what gets the views, right? These extreme examples of mental health struggles, right? Amityville horror, I think you said earlier when we were kind of chatting, The Shining being another one, right? And then something else you said, Carly, with like, if someone is at home and they're struggling with their own stuff and they turn on a show and there's an example of like bipolar disorder that is this extreme over-the-top example, and that person watching might actually be struggling with bipolar, but then they see that and they're like, well, wait a second, like one of two things. Well, that's not me. So maybe this isn't really what I'm going through. Or then a negative association of, oh my God, if that's me, then how am I going to feel about myself struggling with this? So like, I think you nailed it when you said like, when we talk about negative, it's really accuracy, right? Like inaccurate representations of mental health that's out there right now.
When you say inaccurate too, it's not just about negativity, it's simply inaccurate, right? Where we talked about how in movies and TV shows, you see point A, point B, and C, right? I'm struggling, I go to therapy, I'm better. You don't get to see the whole journey of your mental health healing or, coping. You just see the easy parts.
Right.
Right.
Or the entertaining parts for the viewers.
Right.
Right. And there's usually not focus too much on the recovery part. It's usually the illness, it's usually the disorder, it's the struggle, not so much the work going into getting better and working through something and coming out the back end and recovering, really, right? Because
I'm more of a fan of like reality TV.
Yeah.
Chronically, it's probably not a great thing. But even like in reality TV shows, there'll be certain ones that will show them going to therapy, specifically like couples going to therapy.
give me an example, like what?
So like in Vanderpump Rules, there's been many times, Real Housewives shows,
Kardashians.
the Kardashians too. Yep,
Okay.
for like couples therapy. They'll for some reason they always have therapists that go to the house. We do not do that here.
Make house calls.
So they usually depict them as like, oh, like this is our problem, and then the therapist will say like one or two phrases, and they'll be like, oh wow, and then it's like it's done, it's over, their relationship is great, they're not on the verge of a divorce anymore, and it's like, oh, that's definitely not an accurate depiction of any of that.
You missed the other 20 sessions that went into this healing.
Exactly.
If it was even a real session to begin
Right.
with,
Yep.
right? Reality TV, you know.
How much of
Exactly.
this was staged?
Not only that, but like, okay, so let's say it is a real session. Let's say that, you know, it's Hollywood and there's some therapist that's getting $1,000 a session to show up at Kanye's house and do a couples counseling session, right? If you know you're being filmed, how authentic are you actually going to be? Even if you're really, really trying to be the most sincere, honest version of yourself, if you know there's a camera on you, like we have right now, right? And that millions of people are going to watch this, it can't help but kind of alter how
There's
you
got to
act.
be
Like,
a little self-serving element of it. Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Like some PR person being like, listen, we need to get some positive press. Like, let's get you a couples counseling session. We got this
Right,
therapist that
right.
presents really well on camera.
Yeah.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Not to go too off topic, but
That's what we
Chelsea
do.
Chelsea from Teen Mom actually talked about that a couple of years ago, and how when she was on camera trying to raise Aubrey was difficult because she didn't want to parent in a way on camera that was going to bring her scrutiny.
Like already parents have so much pressure on them with raising a kid, and now like you're on camera and you
The whole
know
world's watching it.
that they're waiting for you to do something just to like jump on and troll.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why this comes to mind, but like Dance Moms.
Yeah.
Have either of you watched that? John definitely has not.
I watched
I
a
know it exists. I think it's it would be like, I feel weird watching that show. Like it's just not, you know,
I
like
wonder why.
something's just not okay.
Oh no, definitely not. Well, even like what was that show on TLC that was like with the pageants?
Oh,
With the
Oh my
Toddlers
God,
and
toddlers and
Tiaras.
tiaras.
That was another one.
That's actually a really good example because one of the toddlers from that show grew up to die by suicide.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was actually a perfect example.
There you go.
Yeah.
Didn't know. I was gonna say that like those parents, right? Those are like more of the extreme of parenting and
Stage
like
moms,
stage moms.
dads.
Yep. So for both of those shows, I would say. And so like usually again, it's like these parents have these like cameras on them and it's like, well, you didn't do that right and you didn't do this right. And then they're like yelling and screaming at their kids. Usually normally their kids are like freaking out because like they have a camera on them.
Mm-hmm.
How do you expect a 5-year-old to react?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
But then
I
people
think
eat
that's
that up, right? Like people
They
love
do.
to judge the dance moms. People love to, you know,
I know.
that's what gets the viewers. Yeah.
And like even just on the topic of reality TV, something that comes to mind for me for like inaccurate-y type of depictions of mental health is Khloe Kardashian with her OCD. She calls it CloCD, which I mean, I don't want to disprove. Maybe she does have it, right? And like the depiction is a lot that has to do with like her organization and the way that her Oreos are so nicely in a circular pattern around her giant mason jar. And that she had an episode more recently where she had a therapist come into her house and they like moved things around in her fridge. And she was like, okay, now you have to sit with the discomfort of this. They like moved her orange juice, which was like all perfectly in a line with her like LaCroix or something. And she had to deal with that. And she was like, no, I can't. And then she moved it back. And then it was like the end of that scene.
That makes me, again, right, not that we know Khloe Kardashian or can discount that she has it, just what we're seeing on TV. It makes me so sad for the clients that I've worked with who really do have OCD and struggle so badly with their thoughts and their fears. And then to have someone show up at school and be like, oh my God, I'm OCD. I need to organize my books. I had one client, she was 11, and she was like, that's so, like, you have no idea how hard this is for me. That's not OCD.
Yeah.
And that's like, I would say, one of the number one like misrepresentations
Yeah.
in pop culture, in the media. A million times, you know, you hear someone say exactly, oh my God, I'm so OCD, right? Because I have to have these things in order. And oh God, I don't like my orange juice not lined up with my LaCroix. And like, it's so much worse than that. Like, it is so heavy and consuming and dark, you know, it really is one of the toughest things, in my opinion, to deal with.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that throughout the show, we talked about earlier, Monk, was it?
Yeah,
Was he
Monk.
was, you know, like some of these things, they just like simplify it to a point that is extremely, I think, invalidating to the person that really is struggling with that. And then someone else, so then they go out into the world and they go to school and it somehow comes out, or they tell a friend that they actually have OCD. And now the friends who have been watching all these forms of media are thinking, no big deal. Oh, they're just very neat, you know. And,
Silly, like, yeah.
yeah. So you have these folks, you know, inaccurately depicting OCD in the media. Then you have people walking around thinking that it just means like being neat or just being particular about things, when in reality, like, a person with OCD is much more likely, it might be something, don't quote me on this, like 10 times more likely to commit suicide than someone who does not have OCD, right? It's a much different thing than a lot of times it's depicted as, you know. And if we're going to talk suicide, like, I think we can't talk about that and talk about the media and pop culture without touching on 13 Reasons Why, right? I know it's been a few years now. How long ago did that come out?
I think I was in high school, so
Yeah, that would make sense.
10
'cause I think it
years
was,
ago,
like, my
yeah.
first year of
That
college.
long ago?
yeah, like probably,
Was it?
yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't think it was that long. There's a couple of seasons of it.
Right.
That's true.
And that's a perfect example of like how during our teenage years things were different than they are now. So it makes sense that it's 10 years ago, because I don't think you would see what we saw on that show
Yeah.
today.
I think the intentions of the show were to like bring awareness to mental health and suicidality, and I think it ended up just being a really triggering show for a lot of people, like way too graphic for the audience that it was directed at. Like, it was directed at teenagers, and like we didn't need to be seeing all that at that age. And
Could somebody just give a quick overview, just for those maybe watching
Yeah.
that aren't familiar with it, like what it's all about?
the premise of the show is like the main character, Hannah, right?
Mhm.
Dies by suicide. Before she does it, she like records all these tapes. Each tape is like dedicated to a reason why she committed suicide. Many of them directed at specific people, or like instances with specific people, kind of coming off as like a suicide as revenge arc, like that kind of narrative. Not to say that that doesn't happen, but I think it instilled a lot of fear in people. Like, oh crap, what if I was a reason for somebody to like feel that way about themselves? And yeah, so that was the premise of the show. The whole show was like dedicated to like each
The 13
tape.
reasons.
Like, each episode was a tape.
It's also become a little bit of a term, 13 reason. That's my 13th reason. So
It's
like
a trendy, like,
it's very
term.
trendy. It's
Yeah.
newer too. So like if
Yep.
let's say Starbucks doesn't have the fall drink that I want, that will be my 13th reason today.
I'm guilty
Oh,
of using that
really?
one.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it literally like a hashtag, maybe, like?
Just like a
Not really,
saying.
just
It's like a slang
I'm
term.
sure it's out there though.
Yeah.
It probably is a hashtag.
definitely-
You know.
It's definitely been used as a hashtag for sure.
All right, so but I'm hearing this, right? And I've watched a little bit of it. I understand what it was. It doesn't, to me, right off the bat, to the, you know, average listener, maybe, okay, what's the big deal? Where's the negative? Okay, it was meant to bring awareness to mental health issues and suicide, and it was graphic, right? And so that it was a somewhat accurate portrayal when it comes to the graphic parts of suicide, the reality of it, right? So then why is it negative?
There's a couple reasons that it's negative.
Is there 13?
Is there 13 reasons why it's negative? Can we come up with that? I think what pops into my mind first, as definitely as a littles therapist, is that when you look at, and this is a reality, it really sucks that it's a reality, but you know, kids do die by suicide, and their reasoning developmentally is revenge. They don't understand the permanency of I'm going to kill myself. So when you look at a teenager doing this, we kind of talk about this all the time, right? It's not your fault this is happening to you. You don't deserve to be bullied, but it's your responsibility to take care of your mental health. And Hannah didn't do that. She blamed everyone else for her final action, which I think is problematic. And I also think if you look at it as like, this is my responsibility, then you have some control in your life back and you can heal and you don't have to take that final action. So I think it's better to, enable people and what's the word I'm looking for?
Power.
Empower people to heal and from things that they maybe didn't deserve or didn't cause.
Right. Yeah, it almost serves as like a cautionary tale, like be careful how you treat people because that you could be like one of their reasons, which obviously it's good to reflect on our behavior and how it impacts others. That's not a bad thing, but that is a huge reason why people end up considering suicide where they don't feel any control or they don't see a way out.
This isn't going to get
When
better.
that might not be the case, right?
Right.
There might be resources that they could have. So in the show too, she like talks to the counselor and the counselor isn't helpful at the school, right? She tries to ask for help and nobody helps her. So it almost like perpetuates that idea that like you're isolated, you're alone, you can't get help, it's not going to get better. And like that is the reality for some people. Of course, I'm older now, and as I'm a therapist now, I wish that there was representation of somebody able to get help and able to come out of that hole a little bit. Obviously that's not everybody's truth, but
So it's like almost like, because also it's almost like it's presented like, and it sounds kind of fucked up to say, but like almost like she wins in the end.
right.
Like I got them back.
I showed
and
you.
You have to live with this. And which then ultimately at the end of the day, we're talking about like glorification of
Right.
suicide then, right? That like there's a win from that. And when I worked in partial care, a lot of the clients that I was getting were stepping down from hospitalization due to either an active suicide attempt or active suicide ideation, right? And I would check in with them when they were getting ready to discharge after our like 8 weeks together or 10 weeks together, however long it was. I'd ask them to go back to that day that they were thinking about suicide or that they had an attempt. And I would ask them like, looking back at this now, did you really want to die in that moment? Or, and it could be a lot of other things. I'm asking kind of an either or question here. I get that. Like, were you just so overwhelmed and really needed a break? And I would say like a good 9 times out of 10, it was the latter, that I was just really, really overwhelmed and I needed a timeout. And I think going back to, I forget who made the point, like a lot of these kids, teens, and just people in general don't understand fully the permanence of suicide. I feel like there's almost like a feeling that I'm going to get a sense of relief in that. It's almost like, well, like when we're really, really depressed, we sleep all the time, right? Because we get relief while we sleep. I don't have to deal with my life and I crawl into bed and life turns off. I almost feel like there's this misconception for some folks that like that's what suicide is going to be, that I'm going to be able to flip that switch and feel that relief of, I don't have to deal with life. But that's so far from the truth. And like, no, it's permanent. People around you, your local, your family, your friends, like everyone's life is going to be permanently impacted because of that act. So for a show to come out and to kind of glorify that as almost like some weird kind of revenge fantasy, I think really did the community a disservice.
Yeah.
In grad school, I took a class on suicidology, which is just the study of suicide. And there was a suicidologist that taught the class, and she speaks about specifically how suicide, the reason for it, there's no specific one reason. There's a biopsychosocial reasoning behind it. And the job of these suicidologists is to go into people's homes who had died by suicide, and really uncover like what may have happened. And even like us right now, none of us are saying committed suicide for a reason too, right? Because of the stigma behind it. Like committed, that's like you committed a murder.
A crime, yeah.
It's a death by suicide is the correct way to say it. And then just going back to what you said, John, about like the permanence and like the misunderstanding of that. I see younger kids than Taylor, and I have a couple of clients that are younger than 8 that have suicidal thoughts. And usually the suicidal thoughts have to do with I'm having a meltdown. I don't understand my emotions, because developmentally at the age of 6 or 7, they probably don't understand their emotions. And I'm going to say I want to die because that means that they get a break, or they get mom's attention, or that they just don't want to feel this really sucky feeling anymore. So I'm going to say I want to die. Because again, it's the understanding of like, there's a relief factor here. Or like, even for some kids, the misunderstanding of like, oh, well, death means I get to go to heaven. So that's like, I'll get to play my Xbox forever if I do that. So like, again, not understanding the permanency of it.
There is actually a trend that I love that just started, where I saw it on TikTok, and this lady was showing just like her beautiful life with her kids and her husband, and she's like, I have this because the world didn't end when my breakup happened in high school. So just like talking about things like that happened to Hannah in 13 Reasons Why, that didn't break me, that didn't end me, and now I have this beautiful life. I love that trend.
That's
And
one
I
of my
know-
favorite
yeah.
things to go over with clients who have struggled with suicidality in the past, is kind of take inventory of like, what are all the things you would have missed, even if it's like stupid little things like my dog yawning. Like, you know, I
That
would
really
have
good bacon, egg, and cheese I
yeah,
had
like I
this
would have
morning.
missed
I'm like,
that.
Yeah, the
Those
little
little things are
things.
typically the things that matter, because, you know, when we safety plan with clients and we say like, what keeps you going, what stops you from acting on these thoughts, typical answers are family, friends, you know, things like that. But most times it is those little things, right? Like, there doesn't always have to be some big like epiphany wake up moment. All of a sudden I'm not suicidal anymore, right? Like, somebody in the character of Hannah's position, right? Like, could have found those little joys. And the trend now I think I'm seeing is like glimmers, right? Like,
Yeah, glimmers.
yeah.
I love that word for it. I think it's so
Me
cute.
too.
No,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it 100%, like, and for some folks, right, like if you've been feeling that way, like, you know, I checked in with a client yesterday, and, you know, it's been half of his life that he's been depressed, right? And so he's been living in this pain, and he can't look back. There's no reference point for him to, oh, well, this time, this is when I felt better. You know, like all he can remember now at this point is the pain. And so we're really asking someone in that position to have hope, right? It's really hope that one day I won't feel this way. Now, me as a 45-year-old man who's, you know, been through some shit in his life at this point, like, I have some reference points of like, okay, yeah, you know what, I could, you know, find meaning in the pain that I faced, and that the pain that I went through in my life is what brought me sitting here right now talking to you guys. And if I didn't go through this, you know, and I wouldn't have this beautiful daughter at home, and I wouldn't be married to Michelle and running this practice with her, and like all these things, right? But I think it's hard for the person that's still in it, and recognizing, especially that's a high school movie. Like, dude, high school is this tiny little fraction of your life. It's 4 years, dude. You know, it's 4 years of hopefully a 80, 90-year long life. And so to find those glimmers, you know, those little moments of, if I can't find gratitude for big things in this moment,
Yeah.
you know, what are the little things that I could find some joy in?
It's so hard when you're in that, like you just said, like in high school, they almost think of it as like you're drowning. You feel like you're drowning.
That is your whole world
Yeah.
at that time.
And
Yeah.
like all I want to do is send you the life vest,
Yeah.
that little bit of hope, and then we can pull you out, hopefully,
Right.
and help
So
you.
I'm feeling this way,
Mm-hmm.
and now I watch that show
Mm-hmm.
Right.
that turns out, like, you know, and it's almost like that main character through those tapes in some ways is still kind of still alive at the end of that movie.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right, you know,
Mhm.
and so it really does those folks a disservice. Like, you know, if I'm feeling that way, I could look back in my life, I can't find any reference points of a time I feel better. This is how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life. Fuck these people who made me feel this way. And now I watch this show that plays out this revenge kind of fantasy, and she gets them in the end. Yeah, man, that could start to feel really appealing to somebody
yeah.
who's especially that vulnerable in that moment.
Right.
You know?
I was saying before that recently I saw there's this woman who's a mother who has a daughter who was 12 who died by suicide, I guess within the past year or so. And she was bullied, and the daughter left like a suicide note that explained her reasons why. Obviously, like, I don't know it well enough to know if, like, did she watch 13 Reasons Why? I don't know, potentially. But also,
even if the kids didn't necessarily watch the show, it doesn't mean it doesn't influence how other people around them are talking about suicide or talking about bullying, or mental health in general. So the mom was taken off of social media because the courts, she was in like a lawsuit because she was kind of shaming the kids that bullied her daughter, which then was turning into like a whole social media war. And like she was banned from TikTok, which was where she was. So like it was obviously an extremely horrible thing that happened to her daughter. And also, though, like, again, it was a depiction of like the romanticization of suicide in real life. It was probably honestly almost like a carbon copy of 13 Reasons Why in a way.
Yeah, well, and I think we talked about this earlier too. Like copycat suicides are a thing. Sometimes that is the nature of disorders where you struggle with that. I do want to say though too, like I feel like there is a misconception that talking about suicide with somebody who is struggling with suicidal thoughts makes it worse.
Hmm.
I feel like that's a misconception. I think people are afraid to, like, I don't want to give them any ideas. I don't want to put thoughts in their head. I don't want to ask them about suicidal thoughts if maybe they're not experiencing them. I think those conversations are really important to have.
Necessary.
And there's been literal research on that it's not a direct correlation, right? Talking about suicide doesn't cause suicide, right? We have to be so careful about how we're having those conversations. And I think the intentions behind 13 Reasons Why were to spark those conversations, and in a way they did, right? They did really cause a lot of conversation. Here we are, right? Yep. But I think a lot of people wished that they were a little more careful with how those conversations were being had based on the show. But it is okay to talk about, it is okay to like have open conversations with teenagers about suicide and suicidal thoughts. It's happening, we're seeing maybe increasing rates of like teenage and child suicides. So like it is important to talk about, but so it's not the fact that it was depicted. It's not the fact that there's shows about it. It's not the fact that mental health is being talked about severely in these shows. It's just like how we're having those conversations really matters.
Suicide isn't a curse word. I feel like it's treated like that sometimes.
Right.
For sure. And so, right, like it doesn't mean that we can't have shows about it, have movies about it, even having, some gruesome depictions of it in fictional shows or in movies. I don't think it necessarily has to be like off limits, like we can't just protect everybody from these things all the time, right? But we also, like, again, as long as it's done accurately, right? And with like a sense of mindfulness of how this is going to be kind of perceived. So along those lines though, so tell me, what about though, like I feel like, and I might be way off base with this because I'm not, that's why I'll let you guys run the show here, because you're definitely more of the pop culture kind of experts, more so than I am these days. Euphoria. Because I feel like Euphoria is almost like more of like the modern day, it's different, but like a modern day 13 Reasons in the way that it's like on a similar-esque topic, not fully, but also edgy and graphic and like
I would say
what's
it's edgier and more graphic.
So yeah,
It's on HBO.
What are your thoughts on Euphoria? Positive, negative, both?
I never watched.
I love Euphoria.
I like it too.
I think it's so good. I think Zendaya's character, what's her name?
Rue.
That show was like one of the most accurate depictions of bipolar disorder that like I've personally seen. Maybe there's better ones out there, but that's one of the more accurate ones that I've seen in TV and movies. They did a really good job showing, we talked about OCD, all these misconceptions. I think a common one for bipolar is like mood swings, where it's really not mood swings at all with bipolar disorder. And they showed her manic, like on top of the world. I'm gonna, I'm king of the world type of feeling. And then the next week, it's not from moment to moment. They showed her like the next day or the next week, laying in bed with the lights off, barely wanting to get up to pee, watching 12,000 episodes of Love Island like in a row, and obviously the show talks a lot about addiction. So they showed like the comorbidity with that, or the co-occurring, disorders with that. I think they did a good job like depicting it. And yeah, it is dramatic. It is entertaining, it is a show. So I think it is important for like us as viewers to look at it with a critical lens, but I don't know, I think they did a good job balancing the two, entertaining and a little more accurate than most examples I've seen.
Yeah. And they're all, it's like supposed to be based in California or something, right?
I think so.
Like LA,
Yeah.
something like that. So it shows like multiple different like socioeconomic levels there, and like how mental health treatment can be different for multiple different people. Rue ended up going to
Rehab.
rehab at one point, right? That's what I thought.
Yep.
And that was a pretty good depiction of that also.
I
But-
liked it too because it wasn't like she went to no spoilers, but it wasn't like she went to rehab and got everything was great. You know,
Yeah,
she still had a lot of
exactly.
work to do after rehab. I like that they showed that.
Yeah. And I also think what's interesting with Euphoria is one of the main characters, I forgot his name. He was like the drug dealer. He died in real life by an overdose or suicide
I don't know if they know it was.
as well.
Yeah, I don't think
it
they
was
know.
something
Yeah.
related to that. Overdose?
Overdose.
It was an overdose. So it's interesting that he actually did die by something that he was actually struggling with in the show, which
Right.
probably made his actual character depiction even more real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one. They just started filming the next season. That probably won't come out until
I know,
2027.
it's gonna be a long time.
So, but what I hear though is like struggles with mental health is depicted in the media. We tend to lean towards like the pain, the disorder, but there isn't usually as much of an emphasis on recovery or treatment. Are we seeing that, right? Like it said, so in Euphoria, you're saying Rue's character does
Touch on it. Yeah.
and they touch on it, whatnot, but it's not usually what people want to watch, right? Like, like if we did a podcast of all just the darkest things, of stories of mental health problems, and that's all we talked about, probably get more views than us talking about like, productive, like
It's like rage baiting.
educational
Yeah.
stuff,
Clickbait. Yeah.
But have you guys ever seen a show called In Treatment?
I've seen it on actual Max, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah.
So I like In Treatment. It follows basically the life of this one psychologist, and it goes into like his backstory and stuff going on in his own personal life. But basically, it's almost like each episode kind of focuses on one client that comes in, and so there'll be like their sessions. And so a lot of the show is their actual sessions that happened, and then what goes on in that person's life outside of that. I think that's a really pretty good depiction of therapy. And again, it's kind of dramatic, and you have to put that out there. But I thought that was a good one. We got to throw out there Inside Out.
Inside Out.
Right, like that. I know we talked about that before. Like for the little guys over here, good for the kids, bad for the kids. What?
It's
Great
amazing.
for the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always am showing YouTube clips of Inside Out. It's great for younger kids to be able to understand like what emotions look like. Oftentimes they're going to like describe their emotions after watching Inside Out as like they have the console in their head.
Yeah.
And like they imagine their emotions as these different characters, which is good because a lot of times they don't understand why they're like feeling these different things. The most recent, the second one that came out, the main characters in that was anxiety and how anxiety suppresses the other emotions that were in the first movie. And also the girl is a little bit older, so she's 13 now. So hormones are raging and she now is in middle school. She has a panic attack at like a hockey game. And that panic attack scene for a lot of people, not children, more for adults,
Yeah.
was kind of triggering because of how accurately Disney did depict it. They definitely did their homework, which props to them, honestly.
Yeah.
Very relatable.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people felt very seen watching that, and I love that it's in like layman's terms for the kids, right? Like, because it is happening to them. They are experiencing these things, and it gives them the vocabulary. Half the reason, I think we maybe talked about this in the last podcast, half the reason why we see kids going through mental health difficulties is they don't have the language or the vocabulary to express what's going on. So it's coming out in all these different behavioral ways. So something like that, even if it feels a little silly and childish, right? Like it does give them the tools and the language to talk about it, which is a huge deal.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And to start young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To start young. Like I didn't think about this
No.
stuff until like, man, I was much older,
Yeah.
And we've talked about this too, but like had all this stuff going on, but it just wasn't something that was talked about, And so with all of these shows, like negative and positive, I think, if it sparks conversation at home and it sparks an interest and an understanding of these things, I don't think too much negative could kind of come with that.
No. Wouldn't say so.
What about other positive stuff? So Inside Out we like. Euphoria we like. It's, it's going to be more graphic. It's going to be darker. We got to reference most recently Simone Biles,
Simone Biles,
right? Some celebrities and whatnot that are advocating and talking about their mental health. What was it with Simone Biles?
She had mental block because it's like a very common mental health related problem that happens with gymnasts. I have a couple of gymnasts on my caseload now, and they all talk about how their gymnastics coach will mention Simone Biles, will talk about how mental health is super important. So what mental block is essentially when they're going to do a stunt and they like have a moment of like can't remember anything. Their body literally almost like goes numb in a sense. They don't know how to be able to like reflex certain muscles and their brain literally shuts off, which is where Simone Biles during the Olympics, not these past one, the one before that, she ended up stepping out of it because her mental block was so bad, which is why she's been working with a therapist pretty consistently. Also, she like mentioned in the press recently that before she won gold medals this past couple weeks ago, she was like having a session with her therapist.
Yeah. I love how open she's been about that because I don't know, I'm very big on like celebrities don't owe us their vulnerability,
Sure.
their life story, you know what I mean? But I think she did such a good job of like using her platform to spread awareness about that, I guess, right? And like what a cool moment. She chose her mental and physical health over like the world's expectations of her, right? Like she really was expected to go and perform and like be that amazing gymnast, but like she kind of knew if I don't take care of myself now, this is going to have worse consequences for me. And choosing that on such a public, global scale is like started so many conversations about it. Just such a good example.
I love it. I
Yeah.
really do. Because I mean, especially, I mean, it could translate to anywhere else in life, but gymnasts, like that life is not easy.
No.
The amount of pressure that's put on them, the amount of training, it's your entire life when you're operating at that level, right? But like, I like the fact that it wasn't like she came out as like, this is my whole identity and this is, like it was more like, no, you know what? Like here, obviously I'm an achiever, right? I'm a gold medalist. I'm out here, I'm making it happen. And I need to see a therapist. And seeing a therapist is what actually helped me, get to, these accomplishments that I had. And I'm sure it probably also helps her dealing with like the fame and all the attention on her and
Right.
whatnot, and she put that out there. And that like this is also what mental health looks like. It's not necessarily the emo kid with like, dressed in all black, head down low. Like it's outside of that as well. And that
Yeah.
the Olympic gold
Right.
medalist is also seeking support for some stuff when it comes to her mental health. I think that's awesome.
She also struggled with like some child abuse, sexual abuse stuff that happened
Oh,
within the
right.
gymnastics world.
Uh,
And she came out about that. Her and a couple of other gymnasts that were
Yeah.
like 2016-ish
is
time.
this with that
There's a
doctor?
documentary
Yeah.
on it too.
Yeah.
Something Nasser was
Yeah.
his name.
Yeah.
So again, another thing that she like was on trial, like, and vocalized what happened to her, and like she didn't have to do that. Also
Right.
didn't make it her whole identity,
Right.
and brought a good awareness to it enough for other people to recognize it as, oh wait, like maybe that's what's going on there. Probably also why she's seeing a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Also, Selena Gomez, we can talk about her.
Yeah.
She recently had well, not recently, I guess like a couple of years ago, My Mind in Me. So that was with Apple TV. She like released a documentary that followed her through her struggles with bipolar disorder, as well as she's had some like eating disorder things that have happened, and also some, was there any type of like drugs with her? I
She
think
had
a little bit,
addiction
right?
issues. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
think
she's
so.
another good one. Also, she has a makeup company, Rare Beauty, that like gives back to mental health
Yeah.
foundations. So she's another one that like is very outwardly spoken about mental health awareness, which is nice to have
Yeah.
because it brings a conversation to it.
Yeah, because sometimes I think it does get glossed over, and maybe it's how much what I'm actually consuming, but I think of like Chester from Linkin Park, I think of Chris Cornell, I think of Robin Williams, I think of Anthony Bourdain. Like you have all these people who were from the outside, you would say they have everything. right? You know, like millions of dollars, thousands of adoring fans, houses, cars, boats, all this stuff. And at the end of the day, those external things weren't enough, right? Because it doesn't really have to do with that external. It has to do everything with how you're thinking about that stuff that's going on externally. But I feel like it's like, and maybe I might be wrong here, but I feel like they're like, oh man, like, yeah, they took their life. That's so sad. There's a memorial or anything. But then it just kind of, that's it. Like that's all we actually talk about. It doesn't really go into like what could have been done differently. I listen to some Linkin Park now, and I listen to those lyrics and I'm like, holy shit, like obviously, you know, like, oh my God, like I wonder like why we don't talk about that part more. It's like, oh, they took their life. It's horrible. It happened. It's all over the news and everything. And then it disappears. And then it, you know, we move on to something else.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for society to talk about.
Yeah.
As
What are you thinking, Taylor? I see.
I don't want to go too off topic, but what you brought up Robin Williams, and a lot of people, again, I could also be wrong. I'm fairly certain that he died by suicide to take control back after he had a diagnosis.
Yes.
That
Well,
I don't remember what
I
the
don't remember
diagnosis
either.
was, but it was going to kill him.
It wasn't MS, but it was something degenerative. Yeah.
So that was his way of taking back control. And then my brain went to Dr. Kevorkian. Media, there's a whole movie about Dr. Kevorkian. You guys know who that is?
Yeah, sure. The guy that up for
I don't-
You don't know who
medically
Dr. Kevorkian
assisted suicide. Like,
physician-assisted
Oh,
suicide.
yeah.
So
Oh.
I could do a whole podcast on why I love Dr. Kevorkian.
Yeah.
And people will not like that, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah. It's controversial.
Yeah, but if you want to talk about suicide and accurately depicting people's real lives, people who are chronically ill and going to die want some type of control, and he gave it to them. And that movie made people, that whole story just made people so uncomfortable. It's such a hot topic.
So, but how was it depicted? So I'm curious because like that could go. They can either make him this monster or they could present it. So how did they choose to depict that story in that movie?
In my opinion, it's subjective.
Okay.
I think that the way you feel about physician-assisted suicide will impact the way you view that movie.
Right.
So you can view him as a monster, like many people do, and they took his license away and he wasn't allowed to practice anymore. He went to jail. People villainized him in real life. Or you could be like someone like me who's like, yes, thank you for giving these people their choice and their power in their life.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the choice you would make, it's like,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
I mean, that could. I'm definitely not going to go down that path
Right,
right now
it could go
because
so
then it's
long.
like you could. That's a
Yeah.
whole nother conversation of, okay, that's their physical pain. Someone could probably make the same argument for emotional pain, and then you know. So another time though. But for the
Yeah.
sake of kind of trying to stay on topic,
Yeah.
I think just one last thing I just want to kind of get into really quick. If like, you know, I think we touched on some different topics and different shows, positive things, negative things that we're seeing. What would you suggest to parents, right? Like when it comes to what they're allowing their kids to digest, right? Okay, I'm not going to let my kid watch this show 13 Reasons Why. I'm not going to let them watch Euphoria or allowing them, or like overall when it comes to, because the media it's out there, right? And kids have access to it whether you like it or not. Like what are your thoughts on what parents could do in order to be helpful?
I don't think that parents should restrict their kids from watching it, because I think that further kind of models the avoidance of like, ooh, mental health show related to drugs, and ooh, no. And it
Sometimes it makes it more appealing too. It's like,
yeah,
scandalous.
It makes
Now
it
I have
more
to watch
appealing,
it. Yeah.
And it also kind of shows that like, oh, why are my parents avoiding this? So it might further avoid the conversation of mental health, suicide, drugs ever really happening in the house. So in a way, I think these shows, as much as like, yeah, there might be parts of it that we don't really like as therapists, I think that they are important for children to be watching, obviously developmentally, depending on where their age is. Like, I don't really think a 9-year-old should be watching 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah.
Or Euphoria. for
Or
that matter.
Euphoria,
Yeah,
no. But I also do think that, like, it's important for kids to be able to have these conversations with their parents, and the parents not to be scared to have the conversations with them.
I think too, if you are a parent with and you know your morals and your values and you know what you want to instill in your child, like I said earlier, you know, have a conversation. Talk about the show that you're watching. Ask your child what they feel about the show, you know. Watch it, make sure you're watching it too, so that you're maintaining your values and your morals.
Yeah, I think the best thing, like you said, as parents, best thing that parents can do is encourage their kids to have just like a critical thinking lens on these shows, because they're, like you said, they're going to be exposed to them anyway. If you're restricting their access to certain shows at home, that might be appropriate, yeah, but they might end up, somebody shows them a YouTube clip at school, somebody, they're going to see something at some point,
They're gonna watch it
um,
at a friend's house.
they're going to watch it at a friend's house. Somebody's, they're going to hear something. They're going to look it up later. So, yeah, monitoring is important, but also not just totally shielding, right? Like
Right.
encouraging your kids to think about, how did that show make you feel? Do you think that show was like upsetting to watch? Do you think, what do you think about that character? Would you have done something different? Just kind of having those important conversations. Maybe not every single show, right? Like you don't have to have those conversations after watching like SpongeBob, right? But if it's a heavier topic, if it's something that you're seeing more and more of, or like negatively impacting your kid or their friends, like, yeah, open conversations. Because, like you said, if you're just shielding your kids from it and they see it anyway, then the message is, oh, I can't feel that. I can't talk about that. I can't experience that at my house. I can't tell my parents about
Right.
it.
With
I have
you.
to
With
I have
you.
to hide it.
You.
I have to hide it. And like, if I'm not a parent, but if I was a parent, I would rather like control the narrative a little bit more. You know what I mean? I'd rather my kid want to talk to me about it and know that they can talk to me about it without judgment, without punishment,
Yeah.
I don't want to make my kids feel like I'm in trouble because I watched that. It's like, okay, you watched it and now what?
I think it's well, I agree 100%, right? I'll start with that. But I also think it's going back to that whole idea of, as a parent, that, putting your oxygen mask on first,
Yeah.
of like, okay, because we're coming from a place of, yeah, listen, have the conversation with your kids, have that dialogue to keep that openness, and so that you can kind of control that narrative. But you also got to check in, like, okay, we're coming from a place as therapists that we have those conversations first. It's like, as a parent, am I in a place myself to be able to have this conversation? Am I being reactive? Like, I have to make sure I'm in the right place. But it all kind of reminds me of, like, I remember, like, back when Fortnite got really big, the video game. I had a dad bring his kid in. He's like, like 10 or something. And dad's like, I can't get this kid off his stupid game. All he wants to do is play Fortnite, 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 Fortnite. It's all he wants to do. I can't get him off the game. He's not doing his homework. It's pissing me off, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so dad, tell me about this game, Fortnite. Like, what's it all about? He's like, I don't know, some stupid game he's playing. I'm like, dude, dad, you're telling me, like, this is the one thing that your kid is spending all of his time doing, and you know nothing about it, actually. Like, and I'm coming from a place of, like, having some common ground of, like, get to know the game, maybe play a couple rounds with them or something. You could now take a, Taylor, you said it last episode or something, like, connection before correction, like, meet him there, connect with him on this thing in order to then be able to maybe set some boundaries. But I think the same in having these conversations about the shows that they're watching when it comes to mental health. If you just try to say, no, you can't watch this, they're going to watch it, then they're not getting your feedback as a parent. It's the same as parents who might have firearms in the house. If you just stay away from it, like, it's just, like, and you don't mention anything about it, then it becomes this thing they want to go seek out, versus, like, educating them about, this is not a toy, and having them understand that. Or when it comes to drugs, like, oh, you smoke pot, that's it, you're grounded, like, and like, no, like, there has to be more dialogue, and I think in general, like, if you can have the kind of relationship with your kid that you can talk about these things and hear them out and validate where they're coming from, like, that's how you're going to be an effective parent, versus just trying to restrict and deny access to. And because I see a lot of parents going that route, right? It's either super restrictive or no idea what the hell they're doing, where we want to live in that middle space.
It's almost like when these parents, like, these shows come out, right? Maybe it's an opportunity for you as the parent to sit down and watch the show with your kid.
Yeah.
And like you can have the conversations as you would with anyone while watching a show. Instead of it being absolutely no, it opens up a time for connection and correction.
Connection before correction.
All right. Any final thoughts?
We should talk about
So, all right, we could touch on that.
Yeah.
Fill me in.
So It Ends With Us is based on a book by Colleen Hoover. The book itself is about domestic violence, and I think it says that right on like the back of the book, you know. The movie, I just saw it recently. It's very true to the book. It's very sticking to like what the author wrote. But I think the author has come under a lot of fire for not that book in particular necessarily, but like a lot of her other books. That's the only one I've read by her, so I don't know. But basically, she's been critiqued for like glorifying domestic violence. Personally, when I read that book and saw the movie, they did depict the abuser as like likable at first. He's very attractive. It's like a little bit of like a romantic comedy at first, and people didn't like that at first, right? Like people were kind of like, we can't like glorify abuse. We can't glorify the abuser. They're giving too much like empathy to the abuser, and like I totally get where that's coming from, you know, especially like if you've been through an abusive situation, you're like, no, like screw that guy, you know. But I think we have to have those conversations of like how people even get into abusive partnerships. People aren't falling in love with the guy who is showing the abusive behavior right from the start.
No.
9 times out of 10, right? So that is how it happens. That is how people get involved in these situations. And I felt like the book and the movie did a really good job at showing how it's not that simple to, oh, first sign of trouble, just leave, right? Like logically outside looking in, we look at that and we're like, oh, just leave. If he's hurting you, just leave. The book and the movie does a really good job at showing why it's not that easy, why it's not that simple. There's all these other factors and the cycle of abuse and what it does to you like internally and mentally. So I think it was okay that she made him likable at first, and like spoiler alert for the movie and the book, like it ends up he's allowed to kind of be in the kid's life. But the sequel to the book, again, this is spoilers, but the sequel to the book, like they go in depth, like great detail about how she has to set boundaries with him, like about like the custody arrangements, about the physical boundaries, about like just all of that, you know. They go into like a lot of good detail about that, and I thought it was handled pretty respectfully. I guess it's really up for debate, but I think the critique, and Sam, you might know more about this than I do, like I think the critique was based on like the marketing of the movie. There's that clip of Blake Lively going around where she's like, get your girls, wear your florals, like come out and see this movie. And it's like, it's not a happy movie. It's not a feel-good movie.
It's like out of touch. It feels
very
really out of touch.
Comedy. Yeah.
So I think that's the critique that I see. I don't know if you guys are seeing something similar, but I think the critique is
Yeah.
more about how it's being marketed.
Because I thought it was a rom-com.
Of course.
I really did.
you
Like
would
a
think
little
that,
bit
yeah.
of clips that I saw of the interviews and stuff. I'm like, oh, it's a rom-com. This sounds fun. You know, like
Yeah,
but-
has Blake Lively in it. You would think, oh, nice
She's a
romance.
likable girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
No, and I think that what's interesting on TikTok, like the first week it came out, there were a lot of trends of like people going in, like being like, oh, this was us before the movie and this was us after, because people who didn't read the
Yeah.
book had absolutely not
idea.
a clue of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so again, people going and watching it thinking, oh, it's like a nice fun night out with my friends.
Yeah.
And then they're like, shit, that it was absolutely not what it was. There was also like a lot of controversy with Blake Lively and her co-star, who was the husband, Justin Baldoni.
Yeah.
Justin Baldoni.
Yeah.
And how like they kind of had a feud. They both were directing different parts of the movie in general. And so there was also some issues there. So like there was problems with the actual content of the movie and how the two of them were depicted with each other. And then outside of it, there was problems also, which I think personally speaks to like the greater problem within society of like, we don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations.
Right.
And we don't want to talk about, oh, that like the world isn't rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, which unfortunately isn't true. Everyone wishes it was, but it isn't. Which maybe even speaks to why people don't want to talk about mental health and suicide and self-harm and all of these things.
Well, because with this movie, and I didn't see it, right? But just from everything you just explained to me, like I have to say, like for people to have a reaction that this guy at first was depicted as a likable, charismatic kind of dude. Carly, you're 100% right. Like that's how abuse a lot of times starts, right? And there's plenty of times in relationships where you see that the second the man marries that woman, a switch can go off at that point once that person's kind of locked up into that deal, right? And so I think that is a more accurate portrayal of how it can go, right? You know, exactly. Like you're not going to, and it's that idea of like when you're controlling someone, it's this build and break relationship, right? Where I build you up, I bring you in, break you down and build you back up again. And like that's how someone winds up getting controlled. But I'm going to say something kind of unpopular here. Right? I'm going to take it to like even just to look at this for the sake of what our conversation is, right? And I hope that folks don't have the same reaction to what I'm going to say now as they did to the movie, but you can just as easily say, right? And this is in no way justifying or making excuses for anyone's behavior, but for someone to be an abuser, they have to have some serious mental health issues going on themselves in order to treat someone that way. Like, again, it's disgusting, right? I mean, that's my like probably number one thing that really gets under my skin is when it comes to abuse or sexual assault or something even worse than murder. It sounds crazy, but like for some reason it does. But like at the same time, that abuser is like what went on in that person's life that led them to be that person. Same with like the bully in middle school or high school. Like someone doesn't treat someone else that way if they're doing okay.
Yeah, they talk about that in the movie, and I think it is important to help challenge like any kind of victim blamings. So a lot of people in abusive situations are like get caught up in, and usually because of the abuser's approach towards them, but like get caught up in like what did I do wrong? What did I do to deserve that? I must have done that. So like they do talk about the abuser's like trauma and like why he is the way he is, and that helps it kind of put it into a bigger context of like, oh, the way that he treated her was not about her, you know, at all. It was not about her deserving it, not deserving it. It wasn't about her, how she engaged in that relationship. It had everything to do with like his own stuff. And so they did touch on that, which I thought was good.
Right. I think about children, like you're saying, you know, somewhere along the line something happened to you. There was a play therapist who did a TED Talk, and I can't remember her name, but she spoke about how in play therapy she had a client who was picking miniatures, which is like little toys, to represent dad. And he was like, "Can I pick multiple?" And what the play therapist realized was that the child picked different miniatures to represent dad's cycle of abuse. So where dad is this great, awesome dad, and then he becomes this really big, burly character that abuses mom. So children see it, and, you know, I guess the hope is that if like that child who was in that therapy session is processing this, maybe they won't go on to continue the cycle of abuse.
Yeah, right. And it's kind of like what you're speaking to is like almost like a child of an alcoholic, right? Like what drunk dad's walking in the door today? Is this going to be happy drunk dad that wants to play with me, or like drunk dad that's going to beat my ass just because? Here you have something that does sound like a very accurate representation of mental health and domestic violence and abuse, and people had an issue with it kind of being accurately portrayed. Some people did, right? You know, and they got some grief. So,
Can we speak about one more thing?
of course.
So this one is like newer. It's not necessarily, it's pop culture. And so John texted me about it like a week ago. So the demure mindfulness.
Oh gosh.
That one's not sticking for me.
It's not sticking for me either, but for teens, like it is.
Oh, it is.
So I think like, I'm curious, John, because you're Mr. Mindful, right? You do a lot of mindfulness with your clients, like what you think of it.
Oh my God, because I fucking hate it. Like, I mean,
Why?
because it's just like, oh my God, it's like, it's just, one, I just don't like, I guess I don't like things that are super, super trendy to begin with. So that's some of my own stuff. I can admit that it's some of my own stuff, right? But I also think that people aren't like fully getting it. Like I think that it's kind of trendy, but like the idea of like mindfulness is the idea of like being present, being in the moment. And so if you're filming a video on a TikTok fucking trend, and being like so demure, so mindful, cutesy, like with the thought of I'm doing this in order to catch traction online and I'm going to post this. It's like the fucking opposite of being mindful. Like
Yeah.
it's just really not. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like if it's really mindful, we never see it and we never hear about it. You would just do the thing. You wouldn't be making videos about it.
Yeah.
Like I have in my head like doing like a video of someone doing that and then like dropping a safe on them. Like that's just like it's just I can't, I don't like it. And it's just everybody's jumping on this stupid trend and it's like it's a total like it's like a fucking psyop. Like
So like I'm very mindful of how angry things on social media make me. So I really check myself in the moment when I'm watching these things and I'm like, no, this doesn't make me feel good. I'm not going to get pulled into this rage bait. I'm not going to argue with people on the internet. I'm going to protect my mental health and I'm going to close this app right now. Whenever demure or like cutesy comes up, I'm like, I'm not doing it.
where did it start?
It's
And how
this
do we
one
find this
creator.
person?
Yeah,
Can I be honest?
creator.
I don't think it's that deep, you guys. I don't
No.
I don't think it's that deep. I don't think they're trying to promote anything. It's this person talking about how they do their makeup for work versus how they do their makeup for like going out.
Okay, that's how it started.
It's not that deep. It's
And
really
then-
not that deep.
And then she went in,
No,
and
it's
then
just annoying.
it then steamrolled though that like
Yeah.
there's people that are like, oh, look how demure and mindful I am of cutting up my
It's just a
sandwiches
trend-
when I
yeah,
eat.
it's just like
Yeah.
a word that's catching
You know
on.
what it is? We're just I'm just the old lady now that is annoyed by teenage verbiage.
But, like, weren't we doing the same crap?
We did.
Yeah.
So I've crossed over
Yeah.
to my next phase of life where
Yeah.
I'm cranky about the way teenagers
It doesn't
speak.
bother me, but it's not sticking for me. Usually, I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
with it. But
It's just because it's just like, and I get it. Look, in that context, the original context of someone doing their makeup
Yeah.
and that's it. But it's like I saw some like 12-year-old kid or something like walking down the sidewalk talking about like, you know, the whole like the demure and mindful cutesy. I don't even think most people, like you said, it's not that deep. I don't even think they know
No.
what it is that they're saying. You know, they just know that this is, and that's like,
Yep.
you know, like this is going back to watch episode 2, the social media manifesto of why this actually happens, that like, you know, it's just put out there, it trends, and then everybody jumps on this trend without fully knowing why. They just, next thing you know, you're using this like audio file and you're doing this thing and making this video. Like put in the hashtag for that. It's going to be a million videos of people all trying to get traction on social media. And it's ultimately to get more likes, to get more followers. And like, I refuse. I had texted Sam, right? And because Sam's doing some of our social media, and I'm like, listen, we are not doing that. There's not going to be anything about demure. There's not going to be anything about cutesy. There's not going to be anything about mindful, like, unless it's us dropping a safe on somebody. Like, that's really the
I
only
don't
thing.
think we can do.
I don't think we're allowed. I don't think it's like, I think every trend is like that. They like beat a dead horse. Like I'm like that. If I ever make a funny joke, like I beat it into the ground. Like I can't, you know what I mean? And then it's like, I think that's how it is with trends, where people take it so far and it's trendy, it's everything, and then it like burns out really
Stops.
quickly.
Yeah.
And then the next thing happens.
So
You know
what
what
was
I
it?
mean?
What was another one? I know like we're not talking about mental health anymore, but like I don't care. Like what was another one that happened before I was
Slay.
Slay
Everything was slay.
Oh, there's
was
whole
fun.
that Camilla, the brat thing.
Brat.
Oh, Brat Summer.
Brat summer is
Yep.
coming to an end.
Mhm.
So old. I don't know what we're talking about.
It's a brat summer. Absolutely.
I had a 9-year-old the other day go, "No, I'm just trolling you," and I
Yep.
was like, "Yeah, I know you're just trolling
Yep.
me."
They'll refer to things as Ohio, which means it's weird.
Yeah,
Or
I'm still
what
learning
the
about that
sigma,
one.
what the sigma
What the
is like,
sigma.
what the heck? What's the other one? There's like so many weird ones that I'm like, oh, that's aging me. Brat Summer, I understood.
Brat summer.
The demure one, I understand.
Yeah.
There's all the videos of like the dad saying a slang term and then the kids saying
Yeah.
what it actually is
Yeah.
now, and
Yeah.
like, you know, going back and forth.
Yep.
But I like, all right, so I understand what you're saying, that, okay, it helps with rapport building, right? Yes, to understand it, right? But like what I don't like, and no one here does this, I'm sure, but like when you have therapists that are like, I'm going to be the cool therapist that's going to relate to my clients, and they're throwing all the trendy terms out there. And like, to me, that is like the opposite of rapport
Yeah.
building.
You have to like let
you're-
them lead.
Yeah. Dude,
Yeah.
like, okay, like explain that. For me, it's like, wait, what did you say?
Yeah.
what does that mean? You know, like help me understand it. Like I'm not going to then start using that term with them, right? But I'll understand it,
Yeah.
you know. But
There's one that my teens use that I really picked up on and I love it, and it's be so for real.
Be so for real.
Be so for real
Be
right
so
now.
for real right now. Yeah.
Mhm.
or I heard a lot, and this isn't even a thing anymore. Like it's John, it's not that deep.
Not that deep.
It's not that deep.
Yeah.
I
Right?
just said that.
You
to
just
Zach.
said it, yeah.
I just
Yeah,
said that.
it's not that
Jim,
deep.
It's not that deep.
Yeah, it's not that deep. That makes sense to me.
Yep.
Or that tracks.
That tracks.
I like that one. That
Yep.
makes sense to me. That I like using that. I'll use
My
that.
my word lately is like clock. Like I clocked that when you walk it. Like when you walked in. Like I clocked that you were in a bad mood today. You know, or yeah.
Or it's not even a thing. I'll be like, hey, dude, sorry I'm running late. Oh, you're good, dude. You're good. They tell me. You're
Oh,
good.
you hate that? I know you.
You're good.
Oh my God, I say that all the time.
Me
You're
too.
good.
Me too.
You're good. I know I'm fucking good. Like I don't like.
I don't need
I'm
you to
just
tell
saying
me
I'm
I'm
sorry.
good.
I'm running a little bit late. Like it's fine, you know. All right. Listen, I digress. Thank you for tuning in for the 5th episode of the Blueprint podcast, talking about all things pop culture and mental health related. Please, please, please tap that little subscribe button that's up there, and then you can follow us on Instagram. We'll be up there too. We appreciate you and hope to see you next time.